Tonight we spoke about strengthening spiritually our children, doing things from our end to help them get stronger and overcome the challenges that inevitably today they are going to have to deal with. Please subscribe and share. All right, so we are going to start. And what we're discussing tonight is things we can do to help our children. And we're talking here in a spiritual way, and obviously we're talking about helping our children really, of course, equally can apply to helping ourselves. When we're looking at helping our children, there's many factors that impact our children, many of which are somewhat out of our hands, some are completely out of our hands. So what can we do besides having like a prophetic spirit to know what to protect our children from and the wisdom of how to protect our children? Like, what are we supposed to do? So what I wanted to focus on were the mitzvahs that create protection for our children from spiritual erosion and from many, many other things that are going on in their lives. As I said, some of which we're aware of, a lot of which we're not aware of, but it's definitely happening. And I think the number one thing really that we can do in a very in our hands control, at least to a certain degree, is really the food they eat. So I really want to speak about kosher and how that really affects. We could also enhance other things like family purity, covering our hair. But I really think that in terms of the number one thing is food, because your child's body is built on his food intake. And that's why whatever we can do in terms of helping the kosher of his food really impacts, obviously, your investment in family purity, your hair covering. That helps also, definitely helps. I've definitely seen tremendous, unbelievable change in children when these things are improved. But I think the most foundational thing is really the foods they are eating. Now, this concept of protecting my child by beautifying my own commandments is like a very living Mashiach, a very messianic idea, because the definition of Mashiach, of the redemption, is the permanent revelation of God's essence. Meaning at the times of Mashiach, when we're going to look at the physical, we're going to see that its primary component is spiritual. So when I'm adding in something spiritual, I'm adding in a mitzvah to help my child in a very physical way. That's my mindset. The primary component is spiritual, and that's the best way to help. So have you tried? Has anyone here tried this to help their child by adding in their own spirituality? Or helping their help, or doing things to enhance their child's spirituality? Has anyone done that? You can share, you can raise your virtual hand. Okay, we got a virtual hand up. Anyone else? Me for sure. Anyone else has tried to do things spiritually to affect not only the not really yourself, really affecting your child, helping your child? So, oh, someone else. All right. I don't think I got your name. Tink, what's your name?
I'm so sorry. My name is Tamara.
Tamara. Oh, okay. So I have two Tamaras on tonight.
She's my childhood friend.
She told me. I was like, wow, impressive. I told her she was going to get on soon. All right. Okay. So you see, that's awesome. So Tamara, are you now in Chicago?
Yes. I was living in Israel for 15 years, and my children and I moved back last summer. So I've been back in Chicago for the past year.
All right. Well, I hope the readjustment is going well, because that's definitely a Israel, Chicago, very big. I hope it's going well. Of course, you could be anywhere in the world and participate in the class. So you just happen to be in Chicago. You could have said you were in Tasmania, and we would welcome you on just as willingly. Shira, what have you found when you try to add in the spiritual to help your children?
It was different with each kid. It depends what each kid needed. So like, let's say with one kid who was having a hard time in schools, I would try to just give only Chalav Yisrael. Another kid who was just a pain in the neck, I would try to take on something myself to like, help her. Every kid was different.
Okay. Did you sometimes see like a linear improvement? Was it easy to see or was it hard to see?
I think it depends on the kid. I think I was probably expecting like a much faster, what's the word, cure, if you want to call it. But I don't know. I think over time I saw things were getting better, easier.
As someone who's not on right now but does attend the class, I had spoken to her about her children and suggested some spiritual changes, and it was like, whoa, it was unbelievable. It was like so in your face, the change. And I agree with what she was saying. I think there's a lot of factors, and maybe when the problems are more rooted in spiritual weakness, the response when you add spiritually is so strong. But of course, everything goes back to spiritual. So sometimes, as she was saying, we just stick with it and things do improve. Tamara, what was your experience?
I'll be blunt and honest. My children have been struggling a lot for many, many, many years. And obviously with this adjustment moving back to Chicago, it's been very difficult. I, like Shira said, I was, not that I was expecting an instant cure, but like, I was hoping.
We can hope for an instant cure. That's fine. That sounds like how I work. I also want it. I want to cure like yesterday.
But it just never like it. I don't know how to explain it. Like it just doesn't seem to be ending. And not that I expect things, troubles to end, but like it just when it seems like things might be on the uphill, then they go downhill. For me, and I'll be honest, I really tried implementing Tehillim every day for myself, and making sure that I'm at least saying, brachos and Shema every day, and also something that, and I'm not ashamed to say, I never used to do Negelwasser in the morning. And this past year, I tried implementing that. That I make sure that every morning that I'm, doing Negelwasser. But again, maybe, for me, I feel somewhat better, but I'm not really seeing much of a change for my children.
Well, those are all really good things you're saying. And I'm glad what Shira and Tamara are bringing out, because I want everyone to take what we're going to discuss to heart, and you're ready forewarned. It might be like this person I'm thinking of that like, whoa, there was that unbelievable, like miraculous transformation. And I've seen it more than once. And the more common experience is, like she was saying, bit by bit getting better, or Tamara saying she's not sure she's feeling better, which of course probably helps them. But it really does work, because again, and this goes back to, as I'm saying, this almost like messianic vision that the reality is Hashem. The reality is the Spirit. Everything else is just an expression of that. And when we see, especially if we're seeing a child in pain, when we see a child suffering, when we see a child doing things that causes us to suffer, which also means they're in pain and suffering, the deepest thing we can do to help them is spiritual, which doesn't mean we don't also work on the physical plane and whatever we can add and help improve, add or subtract in the physical plane. Of course, we're using those are tools. And we don't believe in them any more than just a tool. But the spiritual we do believe in. And I can definitely say, yes, with my own children, sometimes you do, and you trust, and you add in the Tilim, and you add in the tzedakah, and you do more, and then like things do shift, and they shift, and they shift, and they shift, and people are people. We're not taking away their free choice, but we're definitely helping them heal themselves. And as I said, I really, again, now we're talking here in a religious group, in a religious environment here. So obviously we all like keep kosher. We all keep taras mishpacha. We all do these things, but we can keep them, but we can't be complacent about our children. We can't be complacent in today's environment. So therefore, there still is this perspective. How can I add? And I don't know, some people could feel on like high alert with their children, with the world today. And some people, no, they don't view it that way. They don't feel the world's craziness is impinging on their child. So what camp do you find yourself in? Anyone wants to chime in on that? Is there more of a sense of like the world is crazy and therefore I really do need to help my child who's great and wonderful, but just protect them? Or no, the world's always been crazy, nothing new, so no new concerns. What are your thoughts on that? Well, no responses. I think it's actually a bit of both. Definitely protect. Okay, someone said definitely need to protect their children. I think there is a need to protect more than ever. I think the world always was crazy, but I think it's, as we're like, racing toward Mashiach, it seems to be, this fast-paced, intense, lots of crazy stuff going on and lots of crazy stuff just so accessible. So I think it's good to like sort of look with that proactive eye of, my God, my children are wonderful and I'd like to protect them. So looking in terms of food, and I think the simplest way to understand why I'm starting with food is thinking of it in the very physical plane. You can think about it for your children, you can think about it for yourself. When I eat junk, which I do often, I don't feel good. When I eat processed foods, I don't feel good. When I eat sugar or flour, I am drained and exhausted. When I eat dairy, I know it's going to be hard for my body to digest. The dairy today, the wheat today, these things are really hard on our bodies. And conversely, when I feed my body real food like whole grains, when I'm giving my body steel cut oats and barley and brown rice and quinoa, I know I was fed, I know I can function. I actually have a workshop on chinuch, on educating children. And that is actually the first point I make in the workshop. It's interesting, I would choose that, but I feel it's just so foundational. What are your children eating? What's your child eating? And if we and they are being fed with real food and without the junk that impedes our processing, there's what to work with. And if not, oh, well, maybe we can understand some of the behaviors that way. So that's all on the physical plane. Your food is you. Your food affects you. Your food affects your mood. Your food affects your energy. Your food affects your happiness. We know we're human. We eat. We eat well. We eat poorly. We definitely see it in a very real-time way. If that's true on the physical, how much more so on the spiritual? So how much more so does kosher and the highest kosher, like corn chips is also food. Laffy Taffy is also food. Ketchup could be viewed as a vegetable. There's lots of ways to call something food. So there's lots of levels of kosher. And if we want to help our children, I think we really want to start with what are they eating? There's actually a story with the Lubavitcher Rebbe that he encouraged a rabbi to start a campaign that his congregants should purchase kosher food. And the rabbi was like, why? Their kitchens aren't kosher anyway. Like, why bother? So the rabbi said, well, you know, they have a perception that kosher food isn't so tasty. Once they eat the kosher food and see it is, they'll realize it's not so hard to switch from the current eating habits to eat kosher, and they'll begin to eat kosher food, and then they'll shift, and it'll be easier to make their kitchens kosher. And I have, Baruch Hashem, seen this many times with people I'm close to in Chicago that are not religious, that in Chicago, it's not impossible to get someone who's completely not religious to actually start eating kosher and make their kitchens kosher. But for us, we're talking on a plane where all our kitchens are kosher. So what are we going to talk about? You know, you're not mixing milk and meat. All your food is kosher. All your pots are kosher. All your dishes are kosher. So what's left? Well, of course, there's always more. So we're saying here about the more, about the upgrading. And again, why bother? Because if I want to help my child, a really important way to help them is to look at, not is it kosher? It's kosher. But how can it be better? How can I be more careful? And the more careful I am in what they eat, the more it's going to help them. So one big arena that we all have to be very careful with nowadays is that beautiful topic of bugs. There's bugs in fruit, there's bugs in vegetable, there's bugs in grain. Torah says she has been in Israel for 15 years. So in Israel, it's even worse. I think you have to be even more careful. So if you're coming from Israeli standards, you're probably very good. But for the rest of us, many of those things, fruits, vegetables, and grains, have bugs, especially, of course, leafy vegetables. Bugs are completely forbidden. They involve 6 different biblical transgressions. There's so many common items that are infested. I'm saying all leafy vegetables are generally infested, and artichokes and broccoli and asparagus and cauliflower and fresh herbs and bok choy and Brussels sprouts and cabbage and lettuce and scallion and spinach and strawberries and raspberries and blackberries and mulberries. And barley and rice could definitely be, and so could corn on the cob, and so could quinoa. There are so many things that it's just like, whoa, I really thought I'm keeping kosher. But if I'm eating bugs, it's really not kosher. And it's just all over. Basically, any food that 10% or more of that species has insects, we have to check. And everything I just listed is far, far higher. There's different methods of checking, which I'm not going to go into. Some are washing, soaking, light boxes. If you want to find out more, you could contact the OK Hechsher. They have this free color booklet they will mail to you that goes through many of these common items, and for each one says how to check it. I think that's very helpful because it's something I can read. You can also look online. It's a little bit harder sometimes to understand what it's saying. But most hechsherim, most kosher certifications will have online different tips or methods, procedures, how to check various items for bugs, because once they stopped, you could say, well, my parents kept great kosher and they didn't do this when I was growing up. Well, maybe you're younger and they did. I can say my parents didn't do this when I was growing up. But America was far more into insecticides then, pesticides then. And they did their job. They might have been very unhealthy for us, but they did their job and there weren't as many bugs in the food. And now we're more careful with those things. And there's a lot of bugs in the food. Anyone have their personal experiences, what they do or what works for them or how they've improved or upgraded in this area?
Well, I only buy Bodeg now from our conversation from I think 3 years ago
Great.
about this.
That's great. Yeah, you had that crazy story.
Yeah.
Miriam has a wealth of crazy stories. So I remember that crazy story. Yes, yes, yes. So it wasn't me. It was the story that probably inspired you. But okay, I don't mind taking the credit. That's
No,
good.
combination. It was both.
Anyone else that has shifted and checks more or more carefully or stopped using things over the years in this area? And Miriam's right. There's many things now. Bodeg's not the only brand. There's two different things actually within that to touch on that idea of the kosher certified broccoli and cauliflower and all that you're going to find in the frozen department. One, which is probably more the Bodeg style, is that they check. There could be, they're checking. They might be using some leniencies in checking, but definitely it's better than buying, broccoli or cauliflower from Ted's or, your local produce store. There's also something else that's happened in recent years, which is even better than that. And I mean, there's so many different brands. I don't remember, Belief, Bagan, I don't know. But what they do is they have their produce hothouse grown. And they have them in places that are hermetically sealed that the bugs don't come in. I guess, however they're doing it, that's what they're attesting to. You do not need to check because these bugs don't come here. And again, you can buy it in Mariano's, and you can buy it in Jules, and you can buy it in Kultu, you can buy it in Hungarian. I mean, we live in Chicago. For those of us that live in Chicago, this is not our problem. So that's really amazing because, it's not like I'm relying on how they checked, better or worse. This stuff you don't need to check. So that's like amazing. So there are things that are just making some of these things easier and easier to fulfill. But if you didn't upgrade as much as Miriam did, so that was very nice to hear about Miriam, but it's really seriously, it's funny. I remember years ago speaking to someone about eating out and what they were careful with. And they were saying, well, the scariest thing is the salad. And I was like, I salad vegetables. but then we start thinking about it. Oh, salads, vegetables. Oh, salads, bugs. Actually, they're right. That is, you used to think, okay, you could go out and eat a salad, but I'm like, no, not really. Actually, salad might be the most problematic thing to eat. Of course, nowadays in Israel, I happen to be visiting my daughter today who's in Israel, and it's a Shemitah year in Israel. And wow, okay, that really is like the most problematic thing to eat is anything grown. But us in America, avoid all Israeli products this year. That's not our problem, but bugs really, really is. If you are looking to upgrade, if you're looking to buy into this idea that the higher standard kosher you feed your children, the more chance they have to really be protected and tuned in to the right and tuned off from the wrong. This is the first place I would start, because this is no chumrah. Meaning, some things you could say, oh, you want to, go first class. So really, you don't have to do this. Like I said, you could choose to feed your kids corn chips for supper. I can't say it's not food. So you could choose to do various things, but you might want to go first class and add. Bugs have nothing to do with first class. Bugs involves 3 biblical prohibitions. So it's really serious stuff. And again, like I'm feeding my child bugs. We don't think of it like that. We keep such a clean home, but it's really something to think about very, very seriously. And Baruch Hashem, there's options. Like you could just avoid a lot of foods, or you could find out how to check, or you could, as Miriam's saying, buy things that are certified that they checked, or you could buy things that are certified that you don't have to check. So those are 4 options, all of which really, really, really would be an enormous upgrade to your children's kosher, which really is giving them a spiritual fortress, like spiritual stamina. Your food is giving you that stamina, that strength to stand up against a lot that, trust me, your kids need to stand up against every single day. Another idea, which is more of the maybe adding, upgrading, enhancing, but really, really, really the most significant upgrade I can think of in kosher when you're upgrading as versus bugs, which is really the letter of the law, is Chalav Yisrael, which Shira mentioned she was doing at one point to help her child. Non-Chalav Yisrael is spiritually damaging and actually causes doubts and belief in God, which is the last thing any of us want to give our children today or any day in any society. And it's literally viewed as a different level of kosher. If someone, just to explain the contrast, if someone wasn't careful about glatt kosher, okay, they never were careful to have only glatt kosher, and then they moved to glatt kosher, or they were careful about glatt kosher, but now they're moving to a even better level. That was always kosher. Your pots are still kosher. But if you're moving from not Chalav Yisrael to Chalav Yisrael, literally we don't use the same pots. Literally the pots have to be koshered or replaced. It's literally considered such a completely different level of kosher. There's a famous story.
Right, according to who though?
According to who? Meaning, are there people that say you don't have to kasher? You ask your rabbi if you're saying you don't.
No. I'm saying so many people, so many from Jews who keep Taras Mishpacha, keep everything else, are not Chalav Yisrael. So like, where does it say you have to?
100%. The people. There are definitely many, many, many religious people in America that don't keep Chalav Yisrael. They do. It's all based on, you see, you're coming a number of years afterwards. So it seems like, well, isn't that the norm? No, that's not the norm. It just became the norm in America based on a heter given by Rav Moshe Feinstein. Moshe Feinstein many years ago gave a heter to use not Chalav Yisrael in America based on the concept that, well, the American government has laws and therefore we could use it as a heter not to have the suspicion. In other words, Chalav Yisrael comes from the idea of maybe the milk's not kosher. So Moshe Feinstein gave a heter and said, in America, because there's laws, we can trust that the farmer's only going to put cow's milk into his milk and nothing else. There have been horror stories over the years when they found out that actually there were other things, because believe it or not, in America, people do break the laws. And farmers, like everyone else in the world, do break the laws. That's the heter. In other words, it's very interesting what she was saying. And I'm glad you raised the point, because it's like so many things are just so misunderstood because so many people don't keep Chalav Yisrael. So obviously, honestly, until Rav Moshe's heter, you had to keep Chalav Yisrael. I'm not saying everyone did, like people did many things wrong, but you had to, that was the law. But he gave this heter that in America, which of course is spread to, all countries that have these laws, which of course most countries do nowadays, we can rely that the farmers are following the law. And that's why we don't have to keep Chalav Yisrael. Now, the reason why I'm emphasizing it's Rav Moshe's heter is because, and this is, it's not like it's a story, but I'm saying you can actually see it written in his sefer. So it's in the Shilos and Shuvas of Rav Moshe, this is discussed. There was a school, so after Moshe gives his heter, suddenly there's this concept of, oh, hey, let's throw Chalav Yisrael out the window. And there was a school, I don't remember how many years later, that had a question, and they wrote this to Rav Moshe. And they said that basically, like every school, almost every religious school, they were having severe financial strain. And they were up to the point of cutting a member of their staff. But they realized that if they switched the milk they gave from Chalav Yisrael to not Chalav Yisrael, that would save them a lot of money. And then they'd be able to afford to keep this additional staff member. So they asked Rav Moshe, and they were very, of course, very complacent with their question because Reb Moshe is the source of the heter to not use Chalav Yisrael in the first place. And Reb Moshe said no. He said absolutely not. He said he said a school, a place of chinuch. Of course, you have to keep Chalav Yisrael. Figure out another solution for your financial problems. So it's like a lot of things. It's sort of like, I would say this to my husband. My husband would teach halacha, teach Jewish law to high school girls, high school. I would say you have to be so careful what you say, because you could put 5 only in the situations before it and 5 only in the situations after it. People have very selective hearing when it comes to halacha, and they're just going to pick that line. You said it's okay that was sandwiched in the middle. I clearly remember I'm saying in high school, like girls are saying to me, oh, Rabbi Turin said you can. I'm like, there's no way Rabbi Turin said you can do that. I know you can't do that. Everyone in the class swears, vouches, absolute unity. He 100% said it. So when I go back and find out, well, he did say it, but he said only in the situation, only the situation, only the situation, which means basically no. So why am I saying that? Because in essence, that was Rav Moshe's point. The heter was really in a situation where you can't easily get Chalav Yisrael. At this point in Chicago, Chalav Yisrael's, we would probably define it as easily accessible. But many, many religious Jews that don't keep Chalav Yisrael, they just innocently think, they don't even know this. They don't even know the background. They just think, oh yeah, some people are, it's an extra thing you're careful on. And they don't even know, well, it's obligatory. Well, there's this heter. Well, the heter is only really in a situation where it's not easily accessible. Like somehow all of that got very, I don't know what, over the years, it just gets like foggy. So that is what we've come to. And I'm saying it's not only about Chalav Yisrael, it's about many, 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 many things in Jewish law, that things just sort of over the years that everyone does it. It must be okay. There must be a heter somewhere. The law must be different. And it's what happens. Aliza.
I just wanted to add that when Rav Moshe wrote his tshuva, in terms of such a heter, he was very clearly relying on the government oversight, and that government people would go around to the various firms. And in the last, really, it's almost 30 years already, a lot of the government cuts have cut out that oversight. So the very functions that were, the very vehicles that were in place that he was basing the heter on when you couldn't get Chalav Yisrael milk readily and easily, and it was not the ideal, and he never said it was the ideal, but he was also still relying on those government agencies to have oversight. There's almost no oversight in most places, aside from the mashgiach who comes in once the milk is already there and approved. So it's a different situation.
Exactly. And I'm saying there have been horror stories that have come out in America and in other countries where they found that, the milk actually wasn't the cow's milk they thought it was. So but yes, you're right. But I'm saying that goes back to this whole foundation of a heter. And whenever there's a heter given, just like I'm sure you've all heard this concept, if your friend has a heter for something, that doesn't mean you can use it, Oh, you got that heter? So cool. I'm going to adopt it. No. She got that heter. It's hers, which means, why do we say that? I mean, come on, if a rabbi said something, can't you also follow it? Everything's sometimes very case specific. So as Eliza's saying, yes, very case specific was the idea of the governmental supervision. And also was this idea of if it's not readily available. Miriam, what were you going to add?
So how's the CRC being allowed to put their hashgacha on milk and stuff like that? Then I'm confused.
I think, now the truth is that's a great question. And I think what the CRC is, this might even be a Chicago invention, I don't know, is what they have something called chalav stam. That's what I believe is where it comes from. Which Chalav Stam isn't Chalav Yisrael, but it's something. But to be honest, because I'm careful on Chalav Yisrael, I don't want to say what I don't know what I'm talking about. But I somehow even think it's something that happened in Chicago. But I could be wrong, but like something in my mind is telling me that, but I could be wrong about it. But this is called Chalav Stam. I know that's what it is, but I don't know what it is. I think what it is like, we didn't watch the milking, but there is some type of something we're seeing on some level. Eliza, you're going to clarify that?
A little bit.
Thank you. All right, Miriam, listen to Eliza.
If I can. My understanding, as I mentioned before, that we're relying upon the mashgiach. So very often, the CRC is relying on, and it's typically, the CRC is not big enough. They're relying on a lot of the OU. The OU has many more mashgichim, but it doesn't mean that the CRC doesn't have their own people. But in general, I'm more familiar from Rebbe Goldsweig Alo Shalom with the OU, where they would send people in because here, and I remember asking him years ago, knowing that he did not eat chalav stam and did not have chalav stam in his house, worked for the OU. And so I would see OUD, in different products and asked, how is this? And so the understanding from what, he, Aleph Shalom, had said was that there are two different levels and that there is some overwatch in terms of the mashgiach. The greater amount is what's coming into the plant because they have to check out, you have so many more ingredients. But in order for the OU to give full certification for something, they have to have checked out every aspect of the entire process, which means at some point, so the difference between fleishig, where you need someone, you need a mashgiach at all times on the ground. When it comes to milchiks, you don't need someone there on all hours, but they need to have access at all hours to be able to walk in, have a surprise visit, see what's going on. So they're going not just to the plant where, let's say, Oreo cookies that are OUD, where they're made. So they're not just going into the plant, but they have to also go to whatever the dairy aspect is, and at some point check that out. Whatever the chalav stam is, there has to have been and continue to be access at all steps and stages, which means that anyone can check, anyone can ascertain the full process, but it doesn't mean that it's under oversight at all times.
Okay, so that's got it. So that's the difference. So that's what the CRC is doing, which is called chalav stam. So they're saying we're not literally doing chalav Yisrael, which is watching the milking, but we're on a certain level, we could at any time walk in. So hopefully the people who we're giving this hechsher to have some fear of us, and we're relying that they're not going to mess up, because if they do, they would lose their certification. So it's something, but it's not chalav Yisrael. It's not chalav Yisrael, but that is an excellent question, Miriam, and that is a point as versus things that don't have that at all. I mean, milk is milk, right? No. But again, going back to, and it all goes back to Moshe's heter. That's literally the source. And literally in that heter, it's very clear. If it's accessible, you should drink chalav Yisrael. Or as I said, very famous example, very famous. I'm no big expert on this. This is so famous. That's why I know it as well. Very famous example with the school where he said to them, no, of course you have to still buy. You're a school, which I think is what Eliza meant by saying that even if he's saying there's a heter, it didn't mean it's a great option. It means it's a heter. You're a school? No, a school doesn't rely on heterim, not for chalav Yisrael, not for children. Anyway, so that was something that really is a great place to look and see if I want to upgrade. There's a story, I'll just say it briefly. This is, if any of you have heard of Manis Friedman, I know he's pretty popular nowadays on his YouTube videos and speaks. So this is a story Manis Friedman had in Minnesota many years ago with an Israeli couple that the woman was into all this like meditation type things and was sort of opening herself up to some things and became what we would call possessed. And the man's totally not religious, obviously has no clue what to do with his possessed wife, somehow comes to Chabad, somehow comes to Rabbi Friedman. Rabbi Friedman also had no clue what to do. He asked Lubavitch Rebbe, and the answer was kashrus. So they come and they teach them everything about kosher. This guy knows nothing from nothing. And he teaches them everything about kosher. And they kasher the kitchen and they start keeping kosher. This is Minnesota a long time ago. It wasn't as simple as in Chicago, but he starts keeping kosher, and lo and behold, she comes out of it. Wow, it's a miracle, a true miracle. And everyone's so relieved. They're keeping kosher and she's out of it. And she slipped back into it. And the man comes running to Manis Friedman. Hello, it didn't work. The miracle didn't work. She's back. And he didn't know what to do. And he's like, well, I don't know. The Rebbe said kosher. And like, so he started asking, questioning this and that. And he's like, oh, we didn't tell you about Chalav Yisrael. We didn't tell you about Chalav Yisrael because I mean, you know, whatever, we're trying to get basic kosher in place here. And let's do Chalav Yisrael as well. And they did. And the woman was cured. So when we're talking about this general idea, moving away from the specifics, we're speaking specifically bugs or specifically Chalav Yisrael, but there's a general concept. What you eat affects you. What you eat affects your relationship with Hashem. How do you relate to that idea? Have you ever seen it in yourself? That what you eat affects you spiritually? I'm sure you've all seen what you eat affects you physically, and I'm in a good mood, I'm in a bad mood, I'm in an edgy mood, I'm in a depleted mood, I'm in an exhausted mood. What I'm eating physically is affecting me. Have you ever seen that like spiritual connection, or does it resonate in you that what you're eating can literally make a difference spiritually? Any experiences along those lines?
I mean, what would you look at?
Just sometimes you see things. I don't know. I'm thinking like I had this once years ago with one of my children. That it was just so obvious to me that they just started acting really strange. One of my children, like really wild, like really out of control. And like right away, I was like, I don't know what made me think this way. I'm like, I just wondered because they had just eaten like a bag of like microwave popcorn, and I checked, and it was, I mean, you know, I knew it was kosher. I knew, you know, so I bought it without rechecking the label each time, and it had changed. I don't remember if it became like whatever, so something we DODE, something that we would not have used. And I remember I had bought a case, you know, I haven't bought it in many years, but in those days it came like a case of like 24 bags. We had used like one bag. And I remember taking the whole case and knocking on my Greek neighbor's door and giving it to them as a gift. That was a pretty like wild example that like, it was just like, I was looking at this child and I'm like, something is weird. Something is weird. Like this doesn't make sense why they're behaving this way. But I'm saying, have you ever experienced that in yourself or in any of your kids? Or even does the idea like resonate that like what I'm eating really would make a difference to how I behave, how I'm functioning spiritually? Maybe you haven't seen it in food, but you've seen it in other things that when you do the right or when you do the other, like you just see the difference so clearly in terms of your essence relationship to Hashem. No, nobody else had that experience. Okay, you don't have to have, but it's there. And again, maybe sometimes it's just like so obvious, or maybe sometimes something makes you look. Like I'm saying, I don't even remember what made me look, but I just was like, whoa, this is bizarre. Another area that we could think of, again, because we keep kosher. So keeping kosher and yet looking to help our children more and fortify our children more, we have to look at those areas that obviously somebody's going to say it's okay because otherwise we wouldn't be doing it. But sometimes, as I'm saying, things are okay, but could be a lot better than that. So we spoke about bugs, so cholesterol. The next thing I'll touch on is bishul yisrael. Now, bishul yisrael is something that's obligatory, but there are leniencies in. And there are many kosher certification, what people usually call like Hamisha certifications, that are careful on it. And in the more big certifications, like the national ones, like let's say OU, maybe OK, I don't know OK standards, but OU for sure, they have a lot of leniencies to get around it, which is not saying, and maybe I should explain this idea about like leniencies. You know, because Kamira asked before a great question. Well, the CRC is not going to feed you something that's forbidden. So what's going on? So I'm going to speak about the OU for a second, just to understand the perspective, which is good to understand in terms of yourself and in terms of, you know, what's in the world of kashrus today. So I'm speaking here specifically about the OU, but it's applicable to many other of those types of agencies, but the OU is the biggest. The OU has a vision, a very, very laudable, beautiful vision. The vision is we want that any Jew anywhere in America can eat kosher. That's what we want. We want to make kosher accessible to every single Jew. And that's a great vision. And they're understanding the realities of that, which means they're not just dealing with very Orthodox people that if it's not kosher, they'll skip it. There's a lot of Jews in America that keep kosher, but if this specific spice or sauce or product isn't kosher, all right, so that item they'll eat not kosher, but I mean in general they keep kosher. So the OU is really wanting to make sure that anything you can want kosher exists. And they do a pretty good job at it. In order to do that job, they have to use a lot of leniencies. And they're very transparent. I have to say the OU is very, very transparent, which means every leniency they use, you can probably find on their website, or you could call them and they'll tell you. They have it all written down, all their leniencies, because they have a vision. And it's a nice vision, it's a good vision, and it works. The question becomes, should you use all those leniencies? Again, well, some rabbi said it's okay, why not? Some rabbi somewhere, you know, it's like somewhere in the world, it's 5 o'clock. I think I need a drink. If some rabbi somewhere said it's okay, well, obviously it's okay. So what's the problem? So again, then you get into this murky area of leniencies where, yeah, you could say it's okay, but it doesn't mean anyone's saying it's the best way to do it.
Mrs. Taryn, it is really hard to kind of change on your kids, especially once they're, you know, teenagers and they have their own minds. Because when I tried doing a Chalav Yisrael, it was great. You know, I did it in the house, and then we kind of did it out of the house. And the kids are like, "This is so stupid. It's kosher." And I asked the Rav, and the Rav said, like, don't make your kids do it kind of like discreetly, do it in the house, but don't make them crazy. If they're used to going somewhere, don't make them crazy about it. So I was like, okay. And that kind of gave me that, like, you know, headspace to think that I could be a little more lenient. And I was, and I am. I it's very hard to push on them once they've been used to going to Dunkin' Donuts or, you know what I mean, eating certain
I totally hear what you're saying, and I totally understand where the rabbi was coming from. And what you're doing is the best you can do. You're doing the best you can do. You are giving it to them in the home. The suppers they eat, the snacks that are accessible, when you take them out to eat, you are doing the best you can do. They're teenagers. They're already making their own decisions. They haven't been trained this way. All their friends eat this. It's a very hard thing to fight. Conversely, if you have younger children, or if they go to a school, I'll just go back to Chalav Yisrael as a simple example, though, of course, you know, it's with many things. But let's say, if your kids go to certain schools in Chicago, none of their peers eat Chalav Yisrael. And they've been like that for years, and suddenly they're 16 and you're telling them no, and they're like, I've done it forever. All my friends do it. I'm not stopping. As versus if they're 5 and they go to a school where all their peers basically do eat chalav Yisrael, then you could not take them to let them go to those places because it's within their social scene. You know what I mean? And you could tell the older children, you do it fine, but don't do it with the younger kids. You know, I can protect
Right.
them.
No, but when you said like that the pots are not even considered kosher, they have to be kashered again. I was like, oh my gosh, that seems like it's really like forbidden.
Are the kids bringing stuff home and cooking in your pots?
Yeah, one time the kids went shopping and brought home Wacky Mac, which is OUD. Yeah, so yeah, for sure they did.
Again, there's different standards. I'm sure there's plenty of rabbis that will tell you that's fine and don't worry about it. And there's rabbis that will tell you kosher it. It's you know, I obviously there's rabbis that will say like this, and there's rabbis that will say like that. There are people that be more careful, there are people that will be more lenient. It's, you know, and you're going to do the best you're going to do with it. We always, I think that perspective that she was bringing out is very real and is very true. And especially if your kids are already teenagers, as versus when they're younger, when you're, and I can say for myself, like in a different way, but in a very similar way, we're very careful on kosher to a very extreme crazy degree, because I really, really feel this intently. You know, I want to protect my children and they are what they eat and all such stuff. But definitely as my children get older, they're going to make choices and they're going to eat things that they know we don't eat. You know, obviously it's in a different range. It's a different arena of challenge. And that's okay. And it's okay. I'm doing my best for them. I'm raising them this way. I'm giving them this food. I'm raising them, giving them at least like when you're young, your roots are strong. So their roots are as strong and kosher as I can give them. And, you know, when they get to a certain point, if it's going to be 15 or 18 or 20, at a certain point, they're going to make their own choices. And it's not just in kosher, it's in everything we do in our life. We try to give them the best roots, the healthiest roots, the strongest roots, and we trust those roots. And I think very strongly, and it's not only in kosher, it's for everything we do with our children. If you know, like Tamara was saying before, how she's tried this, she's tried that, she doesn't really see an improvement. We have to believe in the process and the product. The product is godliness. And the process is how we infuse our home with that godliness. And when we do that, and the younger your kids are, the better off you are. If they're not born yet, you got an advantage. If you're just pregnant, you got an advantage. But because education begins from conception. But at whatever point they're holding, we try to infuse the home with an awareness of God. And we infuse it by talking a lot. Our kids always interested in listening, grab the opportunity. I have one of my sons home now, nice, not usually home. And we got into a conversation. I had many other things I needed to be doing at the time, but I'm like, this is precious. He's talking to me about these issues. This is more important than anything else. Everything else like is irrelevant, as if I had nothing else to do but talk. So you talk, you share.
Sister, and I have to say, Ms. Turin, you kind of do that for everyone. I mean, when I talk to you, I feel that way also. I feel like you have a million things going on and you're totally like blocking it out.
Thank you for the compliment. I appreciate that. Thank you. You see, Hashem, I'm doing something. Somehow I think with your own children, it can even be more challenging. You know what I mean?
Totally, because their issues are your issues and you got to deal with them for sure.
But when we give them that feeling, and whenever there's an opening, we talk about it. And when there's not an opening, you share a story. They see you. They see what's real to you. They have no choice. This is enrooted in them. This becomes them. And then they all become teenagers. And they're teenagers, and they probably all are teenagers with smartphones, and there's teenagers in the world today. And then they're even in their 20s. and later in life, they're in their 30s, but your roots are there forever. You know, even in the secular world, they now understand that the youngest ages are the most impactful on a child's life, entire life, right? All important things you learn in preschool. And it's so true. And Judaism has been saying this for thousands of years. The impact of a child in the fetus, the impact of the child when they're too young to talk, the impact of the children when they're toddlers. These are roots that are so strong that you can trust those roots. So like she was saying, you do your best, you super saturate, and you trust your kids, and you trust the roots, and you trust your kids, and you trust those roots.